Good evening from Grand Junction, Colorado, Steve Wilson. I'd like to introduce you to a couple of thoughts about what causes us the most issues with our health. Let's first of all start with the lack of energy and the way that we go about making energy in our body. Secondly is pain. Pain drives us to do some incredibly dumb things to the tissue of our body. The things that we take to eliminate pain, which, by the way, is signaling you and me that we are deficient in some element. If it weren't for pain, we would have no clue that something was wrong. So the way we curb that or make it go away or numb it up is not helping us any in terms of dealing with it. And by the way, the third aspect of this is a little thing called stress. And therein lies the problem. How are we going to deal with stress? Physical stress, emotional stress, all of these things are really going to determine our health. And if we choose to introduce means of curbing them rather than dealing with them, we have just introduced one of the most insidious things in our life, and that's a thing called disease. And let's start with this thing called energy. You know, without energy, nothing functions. We will sit down when we lack energy. We will rest until our body begins to accumulate a little thing called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. If we don't have that, we reach for the stimulants, the caffeines, the sugars. You see kids walking around with 40-ounce bottles of pop now, loaded with sugar. And you also see the end result of that our children today, teenagers, our boys anyway, 40% of them are coming down with non-alcoholic liver disease. That should be telling us something. We're sending these kids off to prepare for their life in a very sick mode, and they don't even know it's upon them. So if we were to address this thing called energy, we would probably be making a really serious look at such things called D-ribose, things that are good for the heart. We would be looking for coenzyme Q10, good for the metabolic process within the mitochondria, good for the medium that carries it for, and that's carnitines. We would be looking for foods that make that up. Well, that's the fun part as we look at this thing in terms as a company. How can we meet those needs? In that, most of us recognize that our foods are dead, they're engineered, they have no vitality to them, they have no frequency to them, and we're buying things that are just causing all kinds of diseases, if you will. So we put together a package that would build that. Along with that, some of the most fabulous elements to deal with the cleansing of the body, plus the energies, the fuel for it. One is, I think, the most interesting thing, which is red beets, which causes the body or the cells to vasodilate, which means we can get an enormous amount of oxygen into the tissue. The possibilities of this becomes endless. And until you do that simple thing, you really haven't accomplished what you set out for, which is to create energy. Along with that, we know that without oxygen, this metabolic process called the building of ATP in the cells will not function, nor will anything else, if you will, without oxygen. The second thing is our country has become quite large since we've introduced sugars into our diet to make sure that we've got that energy. And the byproduct of that, surprisingly, is the obesity rate of this culture, and the diabetes, and the cancers. And all of these things that we're discussing is attributable, if you will, to our diets. I think it would be a fair thing to say that our diets make up a huge reason. In fact, the Western medicine says that 95% of all diseases could be eradicated with a change of diet. Now you tell me why, with all of that evidence, that we choose to live in a fatigued, painful world of a body when all we'd have to do is change some of our habits. Well, we recognize that. So we have used a little thing called sweet potato, which is one of those rare carbohydrates that actually drives down the glycemic index. Well, that's got to be interesting to anyone looking at a sugar problem in the blood. Along with that, there are elements in sugar beets, sweet potatoes, that actually controls hormones, which are the directors of the body in terms of bringing together a control of your senses. Then we get into some of the most interesting things, such as hemp hearts, loaded with fats, loaded with essential oils. And these, surprisingly, are the highest contributors of building ATP that we know. We're talking about fats. And then the glorious thing is a little thing called goat whey. Goat whey is proving to be an incredible product for you and I to utilize. So instead of eating foods that are void of nutrients, that are grown in areas where they are produced by pesticides and artificial fertilizers, why wouldn't we take the opportunity, since we live in this body, or we're going to live in it a long time, wouldn't it make sense just to try something that, given a few minutes, or I should say a week or so, would change your whole lifestyle? The possibility of that is incredibly high. And we'd like to introduce you to these elements. We call them Beet Pro and Beet Prime. We've packaged a program that gives you the things that build up the heart, that begin to affect your issues of pain and lack of energy. Along with that, we've got elements in food form that begin to deal with the hormonal issue, your attitude, that stress. If we can control how you respond to stress, it's not as though you're going to be able to avoid it, because we live in a world of stress. We live in a world that's just loaded with toxins. And not only do we get them by breathing them in, but we also get them in our foods, in our waters, and just the environment. And stress by itself is one of the most toxic things that you can produce. So it's with that. Give me a call at thenefesh.com. Steve Wilson, here to help you get to where we need to be.